Yahoo! Today we want to talk about tempo and the concept of it and how tempo can help us to make good decisions in our shogi games. Unlike chess, in shogi, many games are decided by tempo rather than by material. And today I want to explain what tempo really means in simple practical terms. First, let's have a quick definition. Tempo basically represents control over the game's rhythm, forcing opponents to react to your actions rather than executing their own plans. If we want to put it even more simple, in shogi, we attack our opponents and they're usually forced to defend, giving us the initiative. Tempo, of course, is not a concept unique to shogi or chess. We can find it in sports, where tempo could mean having the initiative or being on the offensive. We find it in card games, where we have tempo decks that constantly pressure your opponents. So I just want to easily show what it means for shogi. All right, with that out of the way, let's look at some easy examples to understand the concept of shogi's tempo. We can see it immediately. The king is very open, but we just use it for demonstrative purposes. So if it's our move now, we can simply capture this pawn, promote our rook, boop, and our opponent will be in check. Now, check is basically the highest form of tempo in shogi or chess because your opponent has to react to it. They cannot choose to ignore it. So a check always forces your opponent to move. And in this position, my opponent does not have anything on his hand, so he is forced to move the king. He could move his king over here, and now we have tempo, and this already looks pretty dangerous for our opponent. So this is basically the first level, checking the opponent, they have to move, and you can play the next move. Also notice that, for example, if the gold was over here instead, he could reply to this check by blocking with the gold. And now all of a sudden, we lose tempo because now we are forced to move. We're not in check, okay, but the opponent threatens to capture our promoted rook, which is not something we would like. So we have to retreat our rook somewhere, and now it's their turn. And so that will be also tempo for our opponent on this part. So always be careful. If you check, great, but if you lose tempo in the aftermath, that still might be bad. Okay, so let's move over to the next example. We have some castles king here, and each of us has a bishop in hand. If you like, please pause the video to see where we could drop our bishop for a nice tempo play. And in this position, we could just drop our bishop right here, right? Now, unlike the other situation, I forgot the golden hand. We do not check the king at the moment. We do not check the king at the moment. However, we threaten a checkmate with the king drop here. Oh, why is this over here? Oh, that's why I was. So, even though we're not checking our opponent, we threaten to checkmate him next turn because he has no escape. If we drop something here, he's dead. At the same time, we also attack the rook. Unfortunately, he has no time to defend the rook because if he tries to defend the rook, he's going to get checkmated. So that's not in his interest. So in this position, he would have to kind of block here. He could, drop his own bishop here. He could block with the silver to prevent this checkmate. However, we would easily be able to take the rook. So that's our second example, where even if a check is not the tempo we have, often the threatening of a check could be just as important. Okay, then let's have a look at our last example, example number 3. You can see our king here in Anaguma, very, very safe castled. And again, feel free to pause the video to see if you can see where we could have a high tempo play. Now, In the first examples, we covered a check, then we covered a checkmate threat, which is just as important to defend against. This time we're doing something a bit less, and if we take here with our rook, we threaten with the tempo to attack this bishop. So our opponent is kind of forced to defend that because, yeah, it's not a check, it's not a threatened checkmate, but just losing a bishop is, of course, not something you would aim for. So in this position, he would probably have to... No, why did you go there? He would probably have to move his rook over here to protect this bishop. He could also move the bishop out of the way, but that would allow us to take the knight here and playing with the tempo again, attacking the silver general here as well. So these are different forms of tempo, but the key takeaway here is that if you can play an attack that forces your opponent to react, that's generally a good thing. And unlike chess, tempo is the most common way to checkmate an opponent as well. And to close today's video, I want to quickly go over a very simplified checkmate pattern here to see how strong the check tempo is in shogi. In this position, our opponent has all of the pieces in the world. However, it is our turn and we have 4 golds. So by dropping a first gold, we force the opponent to go back. It doesn't really matter which way he goes. And you can see quickly that no matter where he goes, he's going to get checkmated. He has no time to drop any of his pieces. And even though that is a very simple version of how checkmate patterns in shogi work, I hope you get an idea of how it is possible to use tempo to your advantage to threaten or potentially even checkmate the opposing king. I hope this was interesting and helpful, and I will see you next video.